Okay, this video is a book review. The name of the book is The Real Lincoln by Thomas Dilorenzo. He's sort of a famous professor of economics and history. And the interesting thing about the book is it's pretty much the opposite of what is taught in the public schools and by the Ken Burns famous documentary about the Civil War, where everyone's taught that Lincoln is the greatest president in the history of the United States and that he didn't really want the Civil War, but it was necessary to preserve the Union and to free the slaves. That's all BS. That's not true at all. The real story is that Lincoln was interested in money. The Civil War was about money. In 1861, most of Lincoln's revenue came in through the tariffs. About 90% of it came in through tariffs. And 87% of those tariffs were paid by the southern United States. So the southern United States felt that it was getting totally ripped off by having to pay so much of the tariffs. And it got worse than that because just before the Civil War, the North had doubled the cost of the tariffs, and the South said that's unfair. That's taxation without representation and without fair representation. And it was very much like the concept of the Founding Fathers in 1776. They were being unfairly taxed in their opinion. And they wanted to secede. They wanted independence. And so the Civil War wasn't really a civil war about the United States. It was about secession. It was a war to prevent the independence of the South. Lincoln had said, if we let the South go, where are we going to get our money? We get most of our money from them. Okay, Lincoln basically told the South, look, either you stay with us or I'll use the overwhelming numerical superiority and industrial superiority of the North to kill you, to crush you. And the reality is that the South never had a chance. I can't believe how stupid they were to fight the North. The North outnumbered them by more than 4-1. The North had tremendously more industrial capacity, and they didn't even really outnumber them by 4-1. It was more than that because the North had an ongoing flood of immigrants coming from Europe who was easy to, get them to fight as mercenaries against the South. So they really had, almost unlimited manpower in comparison with the South. Okay, and then a little bit of more reality about Lincoln. Lincoln was an atheist, okay? He wasn't like some religious guy like the early founding fathers were. Lincoln's main focus was on economic affairs. Lincoln was a member of a colonization society to deport the blacks. All of his life, including up until his dying day, he said that he strongly favored the deportation, they called it colonization, of the blacks out of the United States. He even sent hundreds of them to Haiti, and he was trying to send them all back to Africa to a place called Liberia. Okay, Lincoln said that the blacks were not and should not be equal to whites. Lincoln's wife had inherited slaves and he sold them. He would not free them. Now that's the opposite of Robert E. Lee, the general for the South. Robert E. Lee said slavery is wrong and it should not be allowed, and he also didn't want secession. The reason why Lee led the South was because they were being invaded, and he felt that he was defending his home state of Virginia, okay? But he himself had inherited slaves, General Lee, and he freed them, okay? He was against slavery, and he freed them. He didn't, like Lincoln, sell them, okay? Lincoln had supported something called the Corwin Amendment that was trying to make slavery permanent. So get that straight. Lincoln tried to make slavery permanent. Okay, he was no friend of the blacks. All right. Lincoln said, like I said, and he was well known for saying this and doing this during his lifetime. Let's see what else. Oh, the South was pretty stupid to fight the North, obviously. They thought that they would do okay because they thought they were better horsemen and hunters, and this would give them the edge, but they're incredibly stupid. The North controlled the waterways like the Mississippi, split the South in half. They were also to control it along the ocean coast, and they just bottled up the South, and the South were screwed. They had very little firearms. They had very little ammunition, very little clothing or shoes. They were screwed. Okay, they fought very bravely, but they were screwed. They never had a chance. If you study it, it's quite remarkable. Lincoln, what else did he do? He suspended habeas corpus. Without a trial, he just imprisoned tens of thousands of people who did not want the Civil War. I mean, that's total tyranny. Tens of thousands of people, he just imprisoned them. He imprisoned the son of Francis Scott Key, the composer of the USA National Anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. He did this war. He waged it without congressional approval. He violated the Constitution in that way. He also violated it in terms of the First Amendment. He censored over 300 newspapers. He was a total, the opposite of what the United States should represent. The Union in 1776 was voluntary. He now was making it mandatory. Those are the two big things he was doing. He wanted money, and he also wanted to get rid of states' rights, and that's what he essentially did. in a sense, the USA was changed from being sort of a decentralized, small family farmer type of model like the Jefferson and Jackson had wanted, Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, to more of the original idea of Alexander Hamilton, a Hamiltonian, federalist, centralized, Lincoln-esque model, which is basically an imitation of Britain. So it's like we had the 1776 to get away from Britain, and Hamilton and Lincoln and their ilk were forcing the USA to go back to a British model. And the Civil War really was big to get rid of states' rights. Okay, they just crushed the South, and that's why that movie. One of the things that's so great about it, they said the South wasn't just defeated; they were destroyed. And because the other thing I had seen when I was a kid growing up, people from the South loved the Southern generals and stuff. They had little statues of them, and they would talk about them. And I'm like, nobody in the North cared at all about Grant or Sherman. And I never quite understood that because I grew up going to the public school and heard all kinds of bad things about the South, all kinds of bad things about the Southern Confederates and all that. And for example, the Northern generals were butchers. I mean, Grant and Sherman, they knew they had total numerical superiority as soldiers. So they were quite happy to let all their guys get killed. It was a joke. I mean, basically, if you have a face-to-face frontal assault between the North and the South, and both lost 10,000 men, that would be a big deal for the South. They couldn't replace those guys. But for the North, that was nothing. They'll just get a couple of European immigrants, replace them in 2 seconds. They could care less. Another thing that Lincoln did, like I said, he censored over 300 newspapers who didn't want the Civil War. He refused a prisoner exchange between, for example, the Rock Island prison in Illinois and Andersonville prison in the South, because he knew that this would favor the North. And so the South didn't have any food. The prisoners in Andersonville were starving. Many of them went on to die. Many of the prisoners at Rock Island went on to die as well. But he just figured, let them die, okay? The South will suffer more. You lose 10,000 men from the South, they're screwed. We lose 10,000 men, it's a joke. We can replace them very easily. So tons more people got killed than was necessary. All in all, the Civil War had the most USA casualties by far of any war ever in the history of the United States. And it's especially a big deal because the USA population was so small at that time. About 800,000 total people were killed in the Civil War, similar amounts on both sides. A lot of the people killed on the side of the South were civilians, women and children. Okay. The North lost more soldiers, but they didn't care. They had tons more soldiers in reserve available. And for every person killed, there was more than double that were, significantly maimed, with lots of amputations of legs and arms. About 1.6 million were maimed. What a tremendous percentage of the entire population that was. And these Northern generals, the butchers like Grant and Sherman, they would go into a town and they would literally burn down every single civilian home. They would RAP, ED the women. Then they would KIL the women and the children. They were just evil. It was what side. That's what it was. And, look at this guy Sherman, what a scumbag he was. Sherman later was put in charge of trying to exterminate the American Indians. And Sherman had said, all American Indians should be exterminated. Stop getting in my way. This needs to be done. And he was doing it in large part, they said officially, to make way for the railroads. Okay, the guy was a sidal maniac, all right? Evil, these guys, okay? They're scumbags. Grant was an alcoholic jerk. Okay, the reason why Lincoln liked him is that Grant didn't care about his men. Grant's like, yeah, fine, go up to the front, let's just have a frontal battle. So what if we lose all our guys? They'll lose theirs. In the end, we got a lot more guys than they do. If you asked a guy from the South, why were they fighting? They would say, because the Yankees have come into our states and they have attacked us, okay? And of course slavery is wrong, but 98% of the Southern guys did not own slaves. It was not about that. It was about money, okay? Later on, when they realized, they were going to come out looking bad, the North and Lincoln said, oh, well, we have to preserve the Union. We have to, free the slaves, okay? That was a later on thing that was used to try to cover their tracks for what they had done to the South, okay? And that's also, like I said, that's why the Southerner guys fought, because their states were all invaded. The war was fought, in the South. Let's see, what else was interesting about it? George Washington, the original founding father, 12 of his family's descendants fought for the Confederacy, okay? And the reason why the Southern people loved their generals is because they were fighting right on the outskirts of towns. And if those guys failed, the town would be burned down. The women RAP, what he did. and the women and the children, K-I-L-E-D. Okay, so whether or not those generals were successful was the fate of their town. And obviously, they were successful for a while. They did, they fought bravely for what they could, but they were just severely outnumbered, severely outarmed, severely, they were, the only thing they had going for them was their bravery and their skill, but that wasn't enough to counteract being outnumbered, like 5-1 when you include all the immigrants coming in from Europe. And not only that, the Northerners had so much superior industrialization and equipment. It's not even funny. So the whole thing was kind of sad, and it would seem to me that they should have. The South was kind of screwed from the start. They could have just, financially, they would have been able to force slavery. Slavery had happened peacefully in England and all the other countries. Obviously, slavery is wrong, and you shouldn't have slavery. Okay, look, believe me, I know a lot about slavery. I'm half Irish. My Irish ancestors were slaves to the British for about 1,000 years, and now they're all being, what sided. Ireland is going extinct, okay? Everybody should know that. So anyways, I just thought this was interesting, the real story about Lincoln and what actually happened compared to what was taught in the public schools.